Assalamu alaikum and welcome to The Report with me, Yasmin Khatun. On tonight's programme, we'll be looking at a report from Human Rights Watch on the troubling condition for refugees fleeing conflict in the Central African Republic. We'll also be discussing news of a potential new vaccine for Ebola. But first, the issue of immigration as well as anti-Islamic rhetoric is making headlines all over Germany. Protests took place last Monday in the town of Dresden, with estimates of 15,000 people attending. Yesterday, that increased to nearly 18,000. People now taking to the streets to show their dismay at the political class and the supposed Islamization of the country. Our reporter Adam Amunu has been following the story.
A record 17,500 people marched on Monday in Dresden in eastern Germany against those they consider asylum cheats and what they consider the Islamization of Germany in the latest show of strength of a growing far-right populist movement. The protests, which began in October, were organised by Group Patriotic Europeans against the Islamization of the West, who call for an overhaul of Germany's immigration policy and what they say is an encroachment of Islam in public life. The protests have rapidly grown in size in half a dozen cities and sparked a debate about immigration and refugees, a country whose fascist history makes expressions of xenophobia especially troubling. The demonstrations have flared at a time when Germany has become Europe's biggest economy and is the world's #2 destination for migrants after the United States. Some politicians have been taken by the tone of the protests, with Justice Minister Heiko Maas saying the marches bring shame on the country and that Germany is experiencing an escalation of agitation against immigrants and refugees, a trend he labelled repugnant and abhorrent. Pedicare leader Lutz Bechmann criticises this. It is the continent's top destination for refugees, who are seen by anti-immigrant protesters to be responsible for strains on the public sector. In response to Pedicare protesters, others presented banners welcoming refugees, only to be met with violence. Only last week did Angela Merkel emphasise that there is no place in Germany for anti-immigrant rhetoric.
In Deutschland gibt es zwar die Demonstrationsfreiheit, aber es ist kein Platz für Hetze und Verleumdung von Menschen, die aus anderen Ländern zu uns kommen. Und deshalb muss jeder aufpassen, dass er nicht von den Initiatoren einer solchen Veranstaltung instrumentalisiert wird. Die Bundesregierung arbeitet zusammen mit den Ländern und den Kommunen daran, dass Probleme, die zum Beispiel durch eine große Zahl von Asylbewerbern auftreten, auch gelöst werden können. Das haben unsere Abmachungen mit den Ländern in den letzten Wochen ja gerade auch gezeigt, und darauf können sich die Bürgerinnen und Bürger in Deutschland verlassen.
As security officials warn of increasing hate crimes, opinion polls show growing support for Pedicare's calls for Germany to have tougher immigration policy. These protests raise concerns for over 4 million Muslims in Germany, a country with the largest population of Muslims in Europe after Russia. The leader of the Central Council of Muslims in Germany, Ayman Maziek, warned that Pedicare could split German society with chants such as "We are the people" and "You, the bad Muslims, and us, the good Germans." With Pedicare planning more protests and the Muslim population set to grow, it is possible that tensions could rise further in Germany. Adam Amunu, The Report.
Joining me on Skype to discuss this now, whether we should be worried about these rallies, is freelance journalist and campaigner Mark Bergfeld. Mark, can you hear me?
Hello, yes.
Hi, Mark. What's happening? We've got 2 rallies in over a week with 15,000 people, now 18,000 people out marching.
This is a very worrying trend indeed, that we see far-right marches against refugees, against asylum seekers, and against the Muslim community taking place in the city of Dresden in East Germany. We have seen other demonstrations in Würzburg, Kassel, and Bonn yesterday as well. However, those have not been as large as the one in Dresden.
And what's happening? What is the German government saying about this?
First of all, we need to be clear about it that since 9/11 and since 2001 and the war on terror, we have seen an increased rhetoric against the Muslim community. We have seen how the Interior Minister Thomas de Maizière has suggested that potential terrorists, Muslim terrorists, have a separate brand or a separate mark in their passports, and we have seen an attack on civil liberties. But in the context nowadays, politicians are speaking out with one voice that we are a tolerant society here in Germany, a multicultural society in Germany, and that effectively people like Pegida do not have a place in our society. However, there is a differentiation to make. On the one hand, the CDU also says we have to take their concerns seriously. That could possibly mean that they will increase their anti-immigrant rhetoric and thus open up even bigger floodgates for even bigger demonstrations to come. But that is an open question so far.
Well, we've had 2 demonstrations in just this last week. What are we expecting to come after this?
Pegida, the organization behind the demonstrations that we have seen, organized singing of Christmas carols yesterday in Dresden, using Christian symbolism in order to break into the middle of society. This is a very worrying trend that they have been able to do so. They have promised and have pledged to have more demonstrations in the new year. But wherever there have been people demonstrating against them, such as in the Western German city of Bonn, they now have canceled the demonstration for the 29th of December. And yesterday we have also seen a mass demonstration of 20,000 in the Bavarian city of Munich. So what we are witnessing is a polarization around the issue of asylum seekers and anti-Muslim racism. And so we are confident that people will defend the immigrant community from the hatred and from the racism of groups such as Pegida.
I know you mentioned their immigration and asylum seekers. What sort of a role has refugees coming from countries like Syria played in this?
Ever since last year, since the catastrophe of Lampedusa, where 350 people have drowned off the Italian coast, and it has been reported that more than 30,000 people have died over in the Mediterranean Sea. There has been a large discussion about whether Germany is taking up enough refugees or whether it is not. According to the Dublin II regulations on immigration, it means that wherever a refugee or asylum seeker enters the European Union, they must stay there. Thus, Germany, naturally, given that it is placed in the center of Europe, doesn't take up as many refugees as, for example, Greece, Italy, or France per se. That has led to many discussions of what Germany's role is in taking on refugees, and particularly given its economic strength compared to its European neighbors.
As well as Syrian refugees we've seen come in, there is a large Turkish-German population. How has the Muslim community in Germany reacted to these demonstrations?
Yeah, well, the background to the Turkish community in Germany is quite a different story. The Turkish community in Germany has been there since the 1950s and 1960s and remains a migrant community, oftentimes with German passports. The older generation do not have German passports, and actually they have been deprived of a voice of what really concerns them and their status within Germany, within those discussions. That is a worrying trend. Often you will see 1 or 2 German-Turkish politicians speaking out in the media, but the general Turkish population is not included in the discussions about racism or anti-Turkish sentiments within the wider population. So it is there's a big question mark over it. The question is, the only way to defeat Pegida and its racism will be based upon the Turkish community coming to the front together with the German community and showing that they will not let themselves be divided by these racists. There have been good examples in the past, such as in Cologne in 2008, when there was an anti-Muslim Congress held here, and Turkish organizations and German organizations mobilized collectively.
Mark, do you think the images that we're seeing in Germany could encourage further anti-Islamic sentiment in other countries in Europe, such as France?
We must be clear about the fact that anti-Muslim racism is the cutting edge or the sharp edge of racism within Europe at the moment. If you look at the title pages of the newspapers, there are worrying signs of attacks against women wearing the hijab, for example, or about halal meat being banned, and similar stories.
Well, thank you.
So until recently, it was out of question for Germany to see such a rise in racism, whereas France or in the UK with the English Defence League, such racism had become the norm. Germany will give, and the recent demonstrations in Germany will bolster exactly those people who have been put on the back foot in the last couple of years in other European countries. So it's a very worrying trend, and we should take the demonstrations very seriously, because the continuous media frenzy that I outlined before is not going to disappear from today to tomorrow. Those are the people that are responsible for the rise of Pegida, the conservatives, the CDU, or the Spiegel, who continuously run such headlines, or are afraid of immigrants and migrants from Syria or Libya or wherever they might come from, are responsible for the mass demonstrations that we're seeing at this moment in time.
Well, thank you very much for joining us for that discussion, Mark. We'll be following developments in Dresden and what's taking place, but that's all we have time for in this part of the programme. Stay with us for the second part of the show. We'll be taking a look at the rest of the day's news and seeing what you've been saying on Twitter. Join us after the break.